She opened her door expecting morning mist and birdsong. What she found instead was a lioness, calm and silent, staring straight into her soul, and at her feet, an injured cub barely clinging to life. But what happened next wasn't just about survival. It was about memory, trust, and a bond born in the wild and reborn on a quiet porch. This story will make your heart race, and maybe make it heal too. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, give the video a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The village of Greendale was quiet that morning, wrapped in a soft mist that clung gently to the trees and rooftops. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, warming the dew-covered grass. Birds chirped as if nothing in the world could ever go wrong. Marin Tallow, a retired wildlife nurse in her late 60s, stood in her small kitchen steeping tea leaves in a clay pot. Her cottage was tucked near the forest's edge, a place she had chosen after years working in noisy animal shelters and busy field clinics. Here, life was still, calm, predictable, or so she thought. As she reached for the honey jar, a strange sound broke the peace. A soft, repetitive scratching, followed by a low, breathy huff. It came from her front door. Marin paused. It wasn't the wind, and it didn't sound like a raccoon or a stray dog. Her heart picked up speed, more curious than afraid. She opened the front door slowly. What she saw made her freeze. Right on her wooden porch, almost close enough to touch, stood a full-grown lioness, not moving, not growling, just waiting. Marin's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen lions before, up close, even held one's paw while treating it years ago. But never like this. Not here. Not on her doorstep. And then, the lioness did something truly unexpected. With slow, careful movements, she bent her head and placed something gently on the porch floor. A lion cub. Tiny, thin, trembling. Its front paw was swollen and bleeding, and its breathing was ragged. The mother stepped back, but didn't leave. She sat just beyond the porch steps, her golden eyes fixed on Marin. The moment felt too quiet to be real. Marin blinked. She wasn't dreaming. The cub whimpered weakly, and instinct kicked in. Marin's hands moved without thought. She turned, back into the house, grabbed an old towel and a bowl of warm water and stepped outside, kneeling next to the cub. The lioness didn't move. She didn't growl or shift or show any fear. She just watched. As Marin slipped the towel under the cub's tiny body, she glanced at the mother again. Her face looked familiar. Too familiar. "Why do I feel like I know you?" Marin whispered. She looked straight into the lioness's eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like the animal looked back with recognition, as if they had met before, as if something from the past was waking up. The cub's breath rattled. It needed help, and fast. Marin called the local wildlife rescue center, her voice calm but urgent. "There's a lion cub on my porch," she said. "And the mother's here too. She's not aggressive. She brought him. Please come quickly." After ending the call, she returned to the cub. Carefully, she touched its injured paw, flinching slightly when it cried out in pain. The wound was deep. A clean cut, likely from a metal trap. She wiped the mud from around the gash and used a strip of cloth to slow the bleeding. The lioness didn't budge. Only her ears moved slightly as Marin worked. "You're trusting me with your baby," Marin murmured, amazed. "Why?" She placed a pillow under the cub's belly to ease the pressure and gently fanned its face to help it breathe. The cub made a weak sound, half a cry, half a sigh, and rested its head on the towel. Still, the lioness watched. Marin couldn't stop staring at her. There was something in her eyes, something more than instinct. A quiet intelligence, a kind of hope, a mother's hope, but also something that stirred a long-lost memory in Marin's heart. A feeling from years ago deep in the African savannah. The rescue team took longer than expected. Marin stayed with the cub the whole time. When the team finally arrived, 2 medics and a vet in a marked truck, they moved quietly, stunned by the sight of the lioness so close, so still. As the professionals took over, Maren backed away, letting them work. But her eyes stayed locked on the lioness. One of the rescuers whispered, "She's not going to leave until she knows her cub is safe." Maren nodded. "I think she brought him here on purpose." To me. The team placed the cub in a padded carrier, hooked up a small IV, and began preparing the vehicle to leave. The lioness rose to her feet and followed them a few steps, then stopped at the edge of Maren's garden fence. She looked at the truck, then at Maren. And in that gaze, something passed between them, something wordless, ancient, and full of meaning. A thread of memory tugged at Maren's chest. Could it be? Had the wild truly remembered her? She didn't know for sure. Not yet, but her heart whispered yes, and the lioness, her eyes soft and steady, seemed to whisper back. As the rescue vehicle rolled away from the cottage, Maren stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the lioness still sitting quietly near the garden fence. The morning mist had lifted and golden sunlight now warmed the earth, but something deeper than the air had shifted, something that stirred a long-lost piece of her heart. The rescue team had been just as surprised as she was, a wild lioness, calmly delivering her injured cub to a human. It was almost unthinkable. But not to Maren. Not anymore. She went back inside her house, her hands trembling slightly. Her old scrapbook lay tucked beneath a dusty pile of wildlife journals in the corner of her living room. She pulled it out and flipped through faded photographs. Smiling volunteers in khaki uniforms, rescued elephants, orphaned cheetahs. And there, on page 11, a photo that made her breath catch. A lion cub, eyes still too big for its face with a small bandage around its back leg. Maren sat beside it in the picture, younger, sunburnt, and tired, but smiling. Selai. Her name had come from an old bush language word meaning light after darkness. 10 years ago, in a wildlife reserve deep in Namibia, Maren had been part of a field team rescuing animals caught in poachers' traps. One hot afternoon, they found a lion cub barely clinging to life, starved, dehydrated, its leg torn by a rusty wire trap. Most thought it wouldn't survive, but Maren hadn't given up. She stayed up through the nights, spoon-feeding it milk, treating the infections and keeping it warm during the cold desert evenings. Over months, the cub had grown strong. It learned to play, to pounce, and even cuddle, something no one believed a lion would ever do. But with Maren, it had. When the day came for Selai to return to the wild, Maren had cried more than she had in years. She whispered goodbye and watched as the young lion disappeared into the tall grass, never expecting to see her again. Now, 10 years later, she wondered, could this lioness on her porch really be Selai? Outside, the lioness hadn't moved much. She paced a little, but stayed within sight of the house, never straying far. The villagers had started to gather, at a safe distance. Some stood behind fences or trees, others peeked from windows. Whispers filled the air. Is it dangerous? Should we call someone else? What if it attacks? But Maren stood on her porch and calmly raised her hand. She's not here to hurt anyone, she said. She's waiting. Later that afternoon, the vet from the wildlife rescue returned with an update. The cub had survived the first critical hours. The wound was deep but clean now. Antibiotics and fluids had helped stabilize him. He'd likely make it. Maren's shoulders dropped in relief. Did you find anything on the cub? She asked. The vet nodded. Yes. There was a tracking collar around its neck. We scanned it. Turns out the cub is part of a monitored wild pride near the Drayborn Ridge region. Maren's eyes widened. That was close to where she had worked years ago. The system pulled up the name of the mother. It's listed as Selai. The words hit Maren like a soft hammer to the chest. She sat down on the porch step, her eyes filling with tears. It's her, I knew it. The vet looked at her curiously. You know the lioness? Maren nodded, a bittersweet smile on her face. I raised her when she was just a cub. I helped her heal, and now she's come back. For the rest of the evening, the village hummed with cautious wonder. Children whispered stories about the visitor lion, and local news reporters began calling Marin's home. But none of that mattered to her. Her thoughts were with the lioness, and with the cub she had entrusted to human hands. That night, the sky turned deep blue and the stars blinked gently above the trees. Marin stepped out into her yard with a blanket, carrying a cup of warm tea. She walked over to where the lioness lay curled under the acacia tree near her fence. She sat a few feet away, not too close, not too far. "I didn't think you'd remember me," Marin said softly. The lioness lifted her head slightly, her ears twitching at the familiar voice, her eyes half closed, not with sleep, but with peace. "I called you Selai back then. It meant something. Something about light coming after darkness," Marin continued. "You were that light once. And now, maybe you're here to bring light again." Selai didn't move, but the steady rise and fall of her chest matched Marin's rhythm. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of history, of trust, of something deeper than words. Marin stayed with her until the moon was high, then quietly whispered, "He's going to be okay, I promise." She stood up, brushing leaves from her knees. As she turned to go inside, the lioness gave one gentle blink, slow and thoughtful, before resting her head once again on her front paws. It was a blink Marin remembered well, the same blink Selai used to give her before curling up to sleep in a tiny crate a decade ago. And just like that, the past and present met beneath the stars. For the next 3 days, the lioness did not leave. Selai lay just beyond Marin's garden fence, resting in the shade by day and under the stars by night. Rain came once, a soft, steady drizzle that dampened the earth and soaked the trees. Still, the lioness stayed. She didn't hunt, didn't wander. She only drank water from the bowl Marin left nearby. People from Greendale began to visit in quiet groups. Some brought binoculars. Others just stood behind the safety of fences and hedges. Children whispered to one another as if speaking too loudly might scare the lioness away. Even the skeptical villagers, those who first warned Marin to be careful, started to bring food for the rescue center and left drawings at her gate. Selai had done something no person could. She had reminded them of something simple. Trust can be powerful. Each evening, Marin would step outside, place a chair near the fence, and sit with a blanket over her shoulders. She spoke softly to Selai. Sometimes she told stories from the past, about their time in Namibia, about the little games they used to play. Sometimes she said nothing at all. Selai would only watch her, eyes half closed, breathing calm. "She's listening," Marin told herself. "I can feel it." Inside, the wildlife center just an hour away, Selai's cub was improving. The infection had cleared. He was eating small meals and he no longer cried out in pain. They named him Quito, which meant hope in a local language. Fitting, Marin thought, very fitting. On the third morning, the vet called. "Marin," she said, "he's ready. We think it's time he sees his mother again." Marin's heart skipped. She had hoped for this moment but didn't know it would come so soon. "Can I be the one to bring him?" "Yes," the vet replied. "We trust you." Later that day, the rescue van pulled up slowly in front of Marin's cottage. Inside was a soft crate, and inside the crate, little Quito blinked against the sunlight. He looked stronger now, though still a bit wobbly. His paw was wrapped and he limped, but he moved with more life in his eyes than he had before. Marin carried the crate to the porch and gently opened the door. She stepped back, giving him space. Selai, who had been lying under the acacia tree, lifted her head. Her ears turned forward. Her eyes locked onto the tiny figure stepping carefully out into the yard. Quito paused. His nose twitched. He looked around, unsure. Then he saw her. The cub made a soft, broken cry. Not quite a roar, not quite a meow, something in between. Selai stood, tall and quiet, and walked slowly toward him. Every eye watching from the village held its breath. Keto limped forward, his steps unsteady. His steps. Selai bent down and gently touched her nose to his. Then slowly and lovingly she licked his forehead. She rubbed her cheek along his back, nudging him with the side of her face. It was an embrace. A mother's embrace. Tears ran down Marin's face as she stood on the porch, her hands clasped tightly over her heart. Selai looked up just once, at Marin. Their eyes met again. Not as strangers, not as animal and human, but as two souls who had once shared a bond, now rekindled in a way neither of them could have ever predicted. There was no roar, no loud cry, no show of force, just a stillness so deep it filled the air like a song only the heart could hear. A few people in the crowd behind the trees wept quietly. The cub leaned against his mother, and Selai lay down in the soft grass beside him. She curled around him protectively, her body shielding him from the breeze. Marin walked down the steps slowly. She didn't move too close, but close enough to sit near the edge of the porch. She watched them for a long time. No words came. None were needed. That night, the sky was clear. Stars shimmered in wide arcs above the forest, and the village of Greendale seemed to breathe in peace for the first time in days. Marin sat outside long after dark. A few lanterns flickered in the distance, but most of the village had gone to bed. She looked at the tree where Selai still lay, now sleeping beside her cub. "I don't know why you came back," she whispered, "but I'm so glad you did." The moon hung low and the sounds of the forest returned. Soft rustles, night birds, the breeze through tall leaves. Under that same sky where they had once said goodbye so many years ago, Marin and Selai had found each other again. Not through luck. Not through science, but through something deeper, something wild, something remembered. Morning came slowly, with soft orange light peeking over the hills and mist curling gently through the trees. Marin woke early, even before the birds began their songs. The memory of the night before stayed with her like the warmth of a blanket that hadn't yet slipped away. She stepped outside, tea in hand, wrapped in her long cardigan. The yard was quiet. Selai and her cub were gone. The patch of grass where they had rested was still pressed down, the shape of their bodies outlined faintly in the dew. But there were no sounds. No movement, just the faint whisper of leaves in the wind. Marin stood still. She had known this would happen. She had known they wouldn't stay forever. Yet a small part of her heart had hoped for one more morning together. She sat down on the steps and took a slow sip of her tea. The steam rose like breath in the cold air, and then she saw them, two sets of paw prints, one large, one small. They led from the pressed grass to the edge of the trees. The tracks were fresh, lightly dusted with dew. They shimmered in the sunlight. They hadn't rushed off. They had walked. Marin stood and followed the prints with her eyes until they disappeared into the mist. That was how they said goodbye. No roar. No sound. Just footprints in the dawn. Over the next few days, life in Greendale slowly returned to normal. The villagers went back to their routines, though something had changed. There was a gentleness now, a quiet wonder in the way they looked at the forest. The local newspaper ran the story on its front page. Lioness returns to save her cub, and the woman who once saved her. A wildlife documentary team arrived 2 weeks later. They filmed interviews, took footage of Marin's cottage, and asked her to retell the story. She spoke softly, her voice filled with feeling, as she recalled each moment, from the first scratch on the door to the soft paw prints in the morning. "I think she remembered," Marin said. "Not just me, but the kindness, the care. Maybe wild hearts never forget kindness." Soon after, a mural was painted on the side of the village school. It showed a lioness and her cub walking into the trees, and beside them, a woman standing on a porch, hand over her heart. Beneath it, the children painted the words, "Where kindness walks, memory follows." One morning, a small boy from the village knocked on Marin's door. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand. "This is for the lioness," he said shyly. "I know she can't read, but maybe she'll feel it." Marin smiled and nodded. I think she will. She placed the letter under a stone near the tree where Silai had once waited, then planted wildflowers around it. Over time, she began to call that place the waiting corner. It became a part of her daily walk, a place she visited with tea and quiet thoughts. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. The flowers bloomed and swayed in the breeze. And one early morning, as light rain tapped against the roof, Maren opened her door and gasped. There they were again. 2 sets of footprints, one large, one small, right at the edge of her garden, near the same fence. The soil was damp and the tracks were clear. They hadn't approached the house, but they had come close. Close enough to say something, without saying anything at all. Maren's eyes filled with tears. She crouched near the prints and placed her hand beside them. You came back, she whispered. From that day on, the footprints returned every month, always just after dawn, always near the fence. Maren told no one. She didn't need to. She simply wrote the dates in a small notebook she kept by her bedside. A secret journal of visits from the wild. A quiet record of love returned. Over time, the visits became her comfort. A reminder that something magical had happened, not because of science, not because of chance, but because the bond between hearts, no matter how different, had found its way home again. Years later, Maren would sit by her fireplace and retell the story to young visitors who came from far and wide. They would listen, wide-eyed, amazed. Lioness came to your house, they'd ask. Yes, she'd say, smiling. But she didn't come with fear. She came with trust. She remembered what it felt like to be helped, and she returned to help her own. When she was alone, Maren still made tea early in the mornings. She still walked to the waiting corner, placed new flowers near the tree and stood quietly, watching the forest. And sometimes, in the first light of morning, just as the world was waking up, she would spot them. 2 shadows moving silently between the trees, one tall and golden, one small and growing stronger with every step. They never came too close, but Maren never needed them to, because the lioness had already left something behind. Not just a story, not just a memory, but a promise. One, made with paw prints in the dawn.